Welcome to Cut Through the Noise with Dave Toronto, bringing you the truth behind the headlines in business and current events. Let's go.
Raising critical thinkers is the topic today. My guest is Barbara Mojica. Barbara is a speaker, teacher, author, specifically of the book, 14-book series called Little Miss History. We're gonna dive deeply into what it means to be a critical thinker. We're also going to talk about history in general and the importance of history. Barbara, thanks for being with me today.
Thanks very much, Dave. I appreciate the invitation to talk with your listeners as well.
Excellent. So tell me a little bit about your background, your history as a teacher, and then why this topic is so important to you.
My interest in education has been lifelong. Ever since I was a little toddler, more or less, I was curious. I always wanted to get into the why, what makes this tick. So as a student, I was always very interested in reading, school, learning. So I never had to be pushed into anything. I was always motivated in that respect. I was born into a lower middle class family. My parents didn't have a lot of money, and I didn't have the opportunity to travel or experience very much outside of my own general environment. We didn't have a car, so I went everywhere by public transportation. But I had this need to see what made other people tick. So I had a passion for travel, and as soon as I was old enough, I had means, I combined that with my interest. So I went to school, loved history from the get-go, but in high school had a wonderful teacher who was dynamite, and she really put that flame in me. And up to that point, it really wasn't my intention to go to college. Again, my parents didn't have a lot of means. And this teacher told me I had to go to college. And from that point on, I was obsessed with the idea of going to college. So I was lucky that at the time I was going to school in New York City, and there was a merit-based system in the city colleges. So if you had the grades, you could gain entrance, and there was really no tuition at that point. You had to provide for your books, expenses, and so on, but the fees were nominal. So that's what I did. I put my nose to the grindstone. I got in. I went to Hunter College. I graduated in 3 years because once I got there, I was in a hurry and I took summer courses, all kinds of extra things. And another very fortunate thing happened for me. A teacher that I had met in summer school at Queens College put my name in for a scholarship. And I didn't even know this. And I got a letter in the mail that I was being awarded a graduate assistantship and scholarship for a master's degree in history. So that's how I got my master's in history. So here I am. I've got 2 degrees in history, and I didn't know where to go from there. I wanted to continue with history, but at the same time, I didn't want to be in that academia world of the ivory tower, only doing research. I wanted to be connected with people. So I interviewed for a few teaching jobs, and as it wound up, I settled into elementary school. And I love that. I worked with children for a long time in elementary school, but as time wore on, I became aware that the needs of a lot of the children weren't being met in the kind of general environment. And originally, I was in a private school, but I saw that children learn in different ways, and a lot of them weren't being encouraged to learn to their potential. So I went into special ed, went back to school again, and I took certification in special ed. So now I am certified in both, and I move into special ed. So make that long story short, I wound up with preschool special ed, children with very, very severe needs like autism and drug addicted children, fragile X syndrome, all kinds of really intense needs. Became a principal of a special ed school and then eventually wound up in administration as a preschool special ed administrator and went all around in all these different fields of education, but of course, always loved my history. So when I finally retired from the system, I decided I wanted to continue with that passion, and I started to write articles for a local news magazine, very short historical articles. And from there, I said, I really want to keep working with kids. So said, I would love to write a series of children's books about history and make it really interesting and exciting for them. And I already had seen how history and civics and government was being sorely neglected in the schools. So my husband helped me out with that. And he said, I can develop a character for you. My husband is an artist, and he developed a cartoon-like character, this little Miss History, who is the narrator of my book series. And she's a cartoon version of a younger me. So, Little Miss History helps children see themselves as a part of history and narrates them on the journey. So that's how I got to where I am right now.
That's a great story. That's a great story. And I just interviewed somebody last week. Actually, no, yeah, last week on autism. And that's an episode that's going to be coming out
Mm,
in a couple of weeks, and, children with disabilities. But it's interesting that your whole path was sparked by a teacher who told you've got to go to college and planted that seed in your
exactly.
head. It wasn't even there. And how old were you at the time? You were 12?
When I met the teacher,
Yeah.
I was a sophomore in high school, so it was about 13 going on 14.
Yeah. Yeah. So in history, to me, seventh and eighth grade history class, those were my two favorite classes. I still, to this day, of all the classes in middle school I took, my favorite were history. And it's not because I had a passion for it. It's because both of those teachers, Mr. Zaccardi, I haven't seen these guys in, I don't know when, 40 years, and Mr. Tosca were phenomenal teachers and storytellers. And I never took notes in either class. I got straight A's because they were so compelling in the way they talked about US history, for example. And I never ended up pursuing it for a career, but I do remember that my interest in it and my retention of it ties specifically back to those two guys. And so it's just interesting that you were prompted back then. Tell me about this. We're going to talk a lot about raising critical thinkers. How does that, where does that come from? Why is that so important to you? And is there something about your passion for history that sparks this other topic that we're going to be jumping into as well?
Well, there's an awful lot of critical thinking in history because in history, sometimes you can almost compare it to science. You have a question or a problem that you want to know about it. So that it's almost like the hypothesis, what is it that you want to solve? And then in order to solve it, you have to apply critical thinking skills to get to the bottom of it. So you have to know the uh, who are we talking about? You have to know the what, and the what also connects to other people because we don't act in a vacuum. So, whenever anything happens in history, there are always other people involved. There are always circumstances and events and other connections, both in that local community and in the far-reaching world around it that are affecting the person and what is going on. And a child has to be able to see not only the who and the what and the when. And some people, when they talk about history, they emphasize the when.
Hmm.
But the time frame isn't is only important in connection with those other variables. But it's the how and the why. How are they connected to each other, and what other influences are acting upon all of those factors? And children today in schools, I believe, are not taught that kind of how piece. The putting it all together and understanding the total picture. So children are not being taught to infer, taking all of this information and then inferring what other factors are surrounding it. They're not being encouraged to analyze and pick apart the pieces. They want to come to that kind of instant answer. So we teach today largely to the test. The Common Core, again, is a way of teaching uh, that doesn't account for individual differences in local communities, in different states. We're kind of just trying to put us all into this kind of same boat.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
and the standards are these kind of arbitrary standards that don't account for these individual differences. And in the last 20 years, our United States, in the United States, we have fallen further and further behind. So, in our effort to bring everybody up, we've done just the opposite. We've brought everybody down. So if you look at 10 or 20 years ago, we were at the top as far as standing of education in the world, and now we're like below 20. So we really haven't accomplished what the initial purpose was, and in the process we waste a lot of time. We are spending maybe 6 weeks of the year teaching to the test, at least 6 weeks. We are telling teachers that they have to collect data, data, data. So teachers spend more time
Yep.
on paperwork than they do teaching the children. Teachers are not encouraged to individualize the curriculum. They're being told this is the curriculum and this is the way you teach it. So, I find that very disturbing. And as time went on during my teaching career, I saw that creep, you know, becoming more and more and more. And teachers actually being pulled out of the classrooms constantly for training for this new program, training for that new program. And the children are left with a substitute teacher. I can remember the last few years I was back into teaching special ed, and I was pulled out of the classroom at least once a week, often more than that, and a sub would be put into the classroom. The children were always, topsy turvy, and that combined with all kinds of other things like schools being influenced by politics. Grant money is another problem. The schools want to vie for grant money so that they can do uh, other things with the students, and there are a lot of strings attached to grant money. So you can get the grant money, but
Right.
you have to do this and this. All of these things really harm the teaching, and I think a lot of our educational system needs to be like completely thrown out and revised.
Yeah, I think it's a mess. I think it's a mess. I have three kids, two in college, one in middle school, and college to me makes me crazy. I know we're not necessarily talking about college, but some of the classes that they're required to take for whatever the college is, it could be 40 grand a year, 80 grand a year, whatever.
Mhm.
the, that first year or two of class is the most generic BS. It's like high school or middle school all over again, mindlessly taught for that amount of money. And what are we doing to prepare these people for life? It makes me
Yes.
crazy when I one of my kids is taking, and there's no problem with say ancient Greek civilization or philosophy. No problem with that. But when it's required, when it makes me crazy to attach a price tag, of 40, 50, 60, 70,000 or more, to take classes that you wouldn't have otherwise taken, or they're not going to apply to your life. Makes me nuts. But I want to go back to something you said earlier on the who, what, where, when, why, and how. And we've all learned those concepts. We all did in school. And as you're talking about them, I teach those things, and I bring up those things when it comes to, say, understanding people in management or sales. So the same types of things, but there's something about, and you also reference this, the testing piece to me that I think throws a lot of it off. Like, with all the best intentions of teaching the who, what, where, when, why, and how, specifically the why and how, it gets completely like diluted by a test that requires the right answer, which can be Googled, without the full understanding of what those concepts and what those critical thinking, attributes are really all about. And it seems to me that school has become more for the teacher trying to prove to the system that they're doing their job, rather than making sure that the student is prepared to survive when they get out of school. And I don't know if I'm asking you a question or just making statements here.
No, it's very true. And again, there are so many factors that are working against the teachers. There are many, many teachers who are really trying their best
Yeah.
to individualize and reach every student. But as I mentioned, there are so many other factors that are working against them, whether it be, the administration. If you want your tenure, you've got to do what they want you to do. And even when you get your tenure, you still have to work within all of these limits. And it's not just the administration, it might be the state, it might be the federal government. And as a special ed teacher, I always had extra paperwork when I was dealing with the special ed students. And that was fine because each of them had this individual educational program, and that was the best way to teach to reach their needs. Problem is, today it's discouraged to have in special ed children in any kind of segregated program. So what's pushed is the quote integrated or cooperative
Hmm.
teaching classroom, where you have a special ed teacher, a general ed teacher working together. And I've worked in that setting too. Uh, but the administration doesn't necessarily want you to follow that IEP to the letter of the law if they don't have the funding to provide all of those services. So that's another battle. And when you try to take a child out of that kind of integrated setting and put them into segregated setting, they will fight with you. And I had to fight the administration to get one of my children out who really needed that special ed setting. And it took like half of the year to do that, but I finally got him out and into that setting. But it is a battle, and then there's the teachers unions.
Right.
That's another thing. Other pressure, because you have to work within the confines of that teachers union, and they will only support you to a certain extent if you butt your head, against the administration. So it's really, really a difficult situation for teachers now who
Well,
are working in that setting.
yeah, yeah, and you mentioned data earlier, and it's important to check all these boxes or to meet all these milestones, and which I guess is okay. I like data. I think it's important to know statistically what's going on. But at the same time, like you also said, the data is showing over the last 20 years that the US is going into the toilet. So the data is showing that all this stuff that they've implemented isn't working. So what data are we really, are we paying attention to the right data? You follow what I'm saying?
Mm.
Like week to week, month to month. You talk about training. Um, these you're pulled out of classes now the student has a substitute who might not even be mentally present to teach anything. They're just occupying the seat so the kids don't go crazy. And then you're in a training, for example, a teacher is pulled out into a training. Is the training even effective? I mean, I train people for a living, but I've been into so many different organizations that have told me how terrible the training they've had is. So, as a teacher who's being pulled out for required training, what's your take on the quality of that training historically? Good,
Uh,
decent, not good?
um, Fair. I mean, I've been to a few that were excellent, but I would say the vast majority middling or and then the other factor is they try all of these new ideas and half of them get thrown out. I one example was in a large city school system that I was working with. They developed a whole new computer system and they spent couple of $1 million developing this computer system. They started to train the teachers in using it, and there were so many glitches on the technical side with the system, they wound up scrapping it. So all of that time, money, and training was just thrown out the window.
Unbelievable. Go back to the I want to build off of that who, what, when, where, when, why, and how. The older I get, the more I realize there are very few absolute answers about anything. I mean, you and I could go watch the same movie and have a totally different opinion on the same exact movie. I could go outside and feel like, wow, crisp, fresh air. You could go outside and say, it is freezing. I do not like this. It's the same situation, different perceptions and experiences of that situation. So the critical thinking involves you've got to consider many different factors: the who's, the what's, the where's, the when's, the why's, the how's, and all of that is subject to perceptions, opinions, feelings. So the idea of getting, say, an absolute answer on a test doesn't seem logical. That doesn't seem like a logical way to test or gauge that individual's understanding. So is part of the problem the way in which we choose to measure the knowledge versus, say, the teaching itself? I know that there's other administrative issues that get in the way, but is our testing flawed? Are we testing for
Well,
understanding, or are we testing for scores and grades?
we're testing mostly for scores and grades. I don't think we're testing for understanding. Another issue with the testing is we have children in our country who come from such diverse backgrounds and a multitude of cultures. And our testing is also flawed in the sense that we can't possibly address all of those cultures and backgrounds when we're testing. So I know in preparing children for reading and math exam, for instance, math isn't so difficult because that's more black and white. And children who are ESL students, they can get the math easier as long as you can communicate effectively and they don't get confused with your terminology. The vocabulary is easier, you know, to target. But when you're doing something like preparing for a reading or a writing test. So these big companies that get the contracts for the testing, which is another issue because sometimes that's largely political and
Right.
so on. But the tests might present the child with a reading passage about an issue that's connected to mainstream American culture. And a child from a different culture may have no experience with that type of situation. And that's another thing that impacts the testing. I mean, you can't prepare them for that. You don't see that the exact passage that they're going to be presented. You can try to give them examples of different things
Mhm.
and explain to them the nuances, but you can't prepare them for that actual test on that actual day.
How
So,
much does testing, so you make a good point on when it comes to say math or even science, I guess. There are absolute answers in math. 2 plus 2 is 4. In theory, I get that's the
mhm,
answer. But in interpreting an essay, or an article or a passage, it could it could go in 1,000 different directions, a million different directions. And especially if you don't come from that experience and you can't relate it, then that test is inherently unfair to the child who has no context, for example. Um, how much does, in your opinion, how much does, all the judgment or right and wrong that goes on in our country right now, how much of that might tie to the right or wrong inherently that's expected uh, to kind of play out in the classroom in the form of a test? You're either right or wrong. You got an A or a B or maybe an F, and there's a labeling associated or an inherent, I don't know, the grade means something, the score means something. It means you're smart or you're not smart, for example. Like those things get attached to those numbers or those scores. Judgments get formed. You self-doubt might creep in, or false and superiority complex might
mhm.
set in. So how much of, what's your take on the manner in which we choose to score our children? How does that impact them psychologically as life goes on, good or bad? Yeah, or neither.
I think it does have an impact, and I think more and more so because one of the things we look at in history is, again, the way that it is communicated. So if you go back 100 years, what did we have? We had letters, we have diaries, we have journals. Those are primary sources, and that's what we should rely on in history. Do we rely on primary sources today? Not so much, because in the past 20 years, 10 years, 5 years, how much has the technology changed? So our children are growing up in a completely different world of communication. And they are used to having that instant answer. And social media has also framed that into a situation of social acceptance or not acceptance. So to them, it's not as important, you know, to have the good grade. It's the way they get it has to be easier. They're used to going on the internet, uh, having a question, okay, going on the internet, finding the answer to the question. Very often they don't go beyond the first page. Very often they will take the first answer that they say, okay, that's the answer. Then if they go on social media, they will be largely influenced by what their friends accept.
Mhm.
And if their friends are not in agreement, they're going to be inclined not to want to disagree, even if they believe that the opposite is true, because they want this peer acceptance. So that has, again, changed the framework a lot. And in schools, if you have an administration with a certain bent, they're going to use social media again to help frame the thinking of the students.
Mm.
And, I think all of this, has a big influence on the way children are learning today. When we went to school, we had to do a lot more work to get an answer. Again, we had to go through that critical thinking process.
Right.
Not so much today. The
Yeah.
student goes to the internet, Well, somebody else has done that work for them. Somebody else has looked at the who, the what, the when, the where, the historical context. And the kids are not really getting into that analytical and influence
Yeah.
piece.
Yeah.
They're, they're just, okay, I got the answer and this must be true. I saw it on the internet and oh, my friends agree with me. This must be it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I had a conversation with one of my sons last week who's going through final exams. He came out of two exams. The first one he came out of, he said, I think I just got 100 on this thing. And he said, I took the same exam last night with all the test exams. He said, this was one of the exams I took that the professor offered online. And his memory was good enough where he took it. The next day he took it again. And he ended up getting like a 95 on it. And then the other day, the same thing happened. He said, I just took this exam last night. So I'm not saying the understanding wasn't there, but it's just, I've just got to commit this to memory and spit
Hmm.
it out on this test tomorrow, and then I can let it leave my brain. And without the critical thinking associated with it, that's what concerns me. It also makes me wonder, what are we shortchanging ourselves mentally and emotionally by not learning to think critically and have full understanding, because life is not about absolute answers. And outside of school and outside of history, we it's really easy to get a quick answer on social media or through Google, but that doesn't necessarily mean you fully understand yourself or what's going on inside. And so I wonder, what are we losing in terms of building resilience and problem solving and conflict management skills? We as parents have, I can only speak for me. I can't speak on behalf of any other parents. I've never, right or wrong, I don't want to be the parent that tries to solve my kid's problem.
Right.
And so that's not the norm, though. I will say this: there are times where my kids have been on either side of a conflict, but in the end, it's their conflict, especially if it's with another child. And but I got to tell you, I see many parents want to get involved on behalf of their child who's no longer a child. And because the kid either lacks the skills to navigate that conversation with another kid their age, or the parent is so insecure or doesn't want their kid to feel discomfort or pain.
Exactly.
And we need that. We need that. I mean, I think back, God, there were so many times where I felt lonely or hurt or afraid. And I'm so thankful for those experiences, because I had to work through them. And if I didn't work through them, I don't know how effective I would be now. So what's your thought process on that? I know I'm probably taking you off track here.
Well, yeah, I think a lot of the responsibility for critical thinking, since it isn't really being taught in the schools, children aren't taught how to think, how to analyze. They're not really being taught to be leaders at all. I think we have to bring more teaching back into the schools about civics and government and understanding how the whole process works, which is largely left out today. Children don't care very much about participating in government. They don't know much about it, don't care to know much about it. I think parents have to take up the slack. My whole view on education is that parents should be given a lot more uh, input into the educational system. They should have more choices, and COVID brought that about. But a lot of parents didn't like what they saw, and they started to think, well, maybe there is another option besides this, one size fits all kind of public school education. And they started investigating the homeschools, and they started investigating getting together and making parent co-ops, like miniature small school systems where they would take turns teaching children. They started to think more about vocational education. I think that's sorely neglected in our country, and we should do so much more to encourage children who have a passion for working with their hands,
Yeah.
or creating things,
Yeah.
not
I,
not in the academic world, but on the other side, and we should be encouraging that. Charter schools, I think, are wonderful, and if you can combine a child's passion
yeah.
for something and put that together with academic courses that enhance that passion and help develop that passion. My own children, one of them was involved with an experimental program at the elementary school level, and he went to a school that encouraged arts. So he learned how to play the cello, and he learned how a recording studio worked, and he learned how to draw. In addition to the elementary school education. For him, that was a wonderful experience. He wound up going into a traditional career in business, but that was so much of an enhancement to his world and his experience. So I think we need to do a lot more of that. But I think parents should be more mentors than taking the position of I am the parent, you are the child. I think the most successful parent is a guide, a mentor who listens more than they talk and is willing to hear what the child's concern is and then letting them figure out how to solve the problem.
Right.
Not doing it. I mean, helicopter parenting is, awful. Just as authoritarian parenting is awful, saying, "Oh, I'm the parent, you're the child, you do what I say." Either way, doing it for them or the approach that, I'm the parent, I tell you what to do, this is what you need to do.
Yeah.
Both of them are equally bad.
Yeah. Yeah. The authoritarian, is either gonna raise an adaptive child, or a child that lashes out typically, and then the other parent is robbing, the helicopter parent is robbing the child of responsibility and creativity and all those
Hmm.
things. And I don't think any parent does those things on purpose. Under pressure, I probably go authoritarian. Under pressure, I become, you know, but the reality is I know enough to stay out of those two camps. But it's funny you bring up the parents should have more of a say, but there are a lot of parents that say too much, and they have too
Exactly.
much to say to the teachers and the school systems. And then there are teachers that, they might not be doing enough. And then there's the child. There's we all have responsibility in this thing. And I think the answer really comes down to, does each part of the equation understand their responsibility in it? And do they understand the other person's responsibility? And I know that not every teacher is great. I know some are better than others.
Hmm.
I want to assume that all of them are trying their best, and that they're up against certain restrictions that are going to limit their effectiveness with everybody. I get that. I know that the same applies to kids in the class. Not every kid is there to pay attention. Not every kid is there to learn, and some are. And then with parents, same thing. Some parents don't care. Some parents are way too involved. But somewhere in the middle, we've got to like step back from whatever our circumstance is and say, how does everybody play a role in this working? And to me, it is a little bit broken. I'm a little bit, you bring up social media, I'm a little nervous of that just in general, because we can't police it. At least right now, there's no policing it. Even if you totally restricted your child's ability to have a phone or access the internet, which is ridiculous,
That wouldn't
wouldn't
happen
work.
today.
Wouldn't, right? Because even if you did, somebody else next to them has all
Their
that
friend,
information.
right?
Oh, but one thing I was going to ask you about is just gaslighting. And I never knew that term until a few years ago. But the idea that even when you do understand, and even when you do have, like, say, critical reasoning or critical thinking skills, we live in a world right now where what you fundamentally know to be true or accurate can easily be questioned. You've got really smart people right now who are questioning whether or not they know anything because of gaslighting. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that we have never been more divided, and you know, again, I think goes back to a parent trying to combat that by just teaching what I call kind of like creative life skills that go along with the critical thinking. So if the parent teaches the child basic values like respect for other people, uh, being willing to listen to the other side of the opinion, and realizing that there are two sides to every question, being honest with children, and the parent may have an opinion, and as the child gets older, obviously the child is going to question some of the opinions of the parents. Parents can learn to have honest conversations with their child and be willing to listen to their side of you. If you want to raise a leader, a future leader is going to have to learn certain skills. They're going to have to learn how to negotiate, how to know when to talk and when to listen. So if a parent tries to instill that in a child, uh, that's, to me, that's a benefit in helping them to perhaps develop that skill on their own as the older they get. And then teaching them just basic kindness, to be kind to other people, to be willing to share. And a lot of kids are very selfish. They want everything. Teaching them that, if we're fortunate enough to have extra, we can be magnanimous, and we can share with other people. Uh, we can teach them to be grateful for what they have. Just gratitude is something that we can do. Teaching them to be humble. Um, humility is a quality that is very largely lost today. Some kids who are very smart, they develop that know-it-all attitude, and parents should discourage that. They should say, well, tell the child, you know an awful lot, but there are other people out there who are very smart and intelligent, just like you are, and teaching them, uh, perseverance is another skill that I think a lot of kids don't have as much of today. They give up too easily because, they're used to this instant, okay, I got the answer, I'm finished, I can move on. This kind of mentality of multitasking. And I'm done with that. I'm going to move on. Teaching them to spend more time on things, to look at all the angles. And parents can give even young kids simple questions, like, oh, this is on the top shelf and I can't reach it. What do you think I should do to get that down? Just, giving them tiny little problems to solve, and you can do that with even with a very young child.
Right,
Um,
right, right. But again, we're up against a world where not only are answers immediately available, rewards are immediately available. Amazon is right at your fingertips, whether you have money or
mhm.
not. If you have a credit card, you can get whatever you want tomorrow. And it's really easy to scratch that itch today. And I'm a big believer in delayed gratification, not because I'm looking to punish myself, but the short-term fix, or the short-term, nice watch, or the nice car, what, it's such a fleeting feeling. It's there's no fulfillment in any of those things. But I wonder, if we need to do a better job with delaying gratification, not as a form of punishment, but as a form of enjoying the process of earning or learning or understanding, if that makes sense.
Right. I mean, how many children have part-time jobs when they're young now? Some of them do, but many of them don't. I mean, used to be the paper boy, and there were all kinds of things that children could do to go out and earn a little money, have a little money on their own. I know when I was 14, uh, I went out and I got working papers to work on Saturday, because I wanted to have a little extra money, and I worked every Saturday, and that was a good experience because I learned so much from, having to get up and show up uh to that job every single week and learn the different steps of what I needed to do and the responsibility that I needed to have to get it finished. Uh, a lot of children don't have that because, again, the parents can provide all that the child needs. There's no need for the child to go out and do that. But even if it's tasks around the home, making sure that children are responsible for things. Well, this is your chore, and you need to do this. And in order for our whole family to function effectively, you've got to perform this job, just like I have to go out and work to earn a living, or dad has to fix something when it's broken in the house. That this is your job, and you need to fulfill it. Even little, again, even young children, you can delegate little responsibilities and make sure that that child knows, well, this is what I need to do, and then praising the child for it so that the child gets a sense of satisfaction and a feeling of accomplishment for doing it. I think a lot of that is I mean, parents are busy. They're working. They're, trying to get the homework done, make sure the child's responsible, can get to school on time, get to soccer practice on time. We have all of these things. But if we train ourselves to be conscious, of the little things like this that we can do with children every day. Over time, it helps them to become more independent.
Yeah, I
And
think
independence is a skill that leads to independent thinking.
absolutely. I think parents over the last 50 years have fallen into the trap of wanting to do better for their kids than they had. For example,
Yes.
whatever that means, because I don't know that I don't know if the results are what we want them to be. They're certainly not showing up in schools, and they're certainly not showing up in our mental health with our mental health problems. But I watched a quick video the other day, and it was a guy talking about his grandfather and his grandfather was a very, very hard worker, and he said something to the effect of, I drive a Cadillac, my son drives a Mercedes, my grandson is going to drive a Ferrari. And but the problems associated with that, and what he said was, tough times tough times create strong, and he uses the word men, but I'll say men and women. Tough times create strong people, right? And strong people create easy times, and then easy times create weak people, and then weak people create tough times. And I can't help but to think that that resonated so much with me, because if we go out of our way, it's the challenges and the hurdles that we overcome that build strength. Why take those away? Why deprive those? Why deprive that next generation of those challenges and hurdles? Let them go through it. The consequences of not learning and not understanding and not learning to think critically deprives them of those skills and eventually creates a problem for that next generation. And so I don't know why we spend so much time trying to get the easy answer, or trying to pass the test so the teacher can get this, or so the student can get that, or to let's just Google this. There are major consequences to the shortcut. And we're seeing them. We're seeing them in the
We're
form of
seeing them in the statistics that they loved so much,
yeah,
are actually their worst enemy.
yeah. Yeah, but we keep doing it. So let me ask you this, Barbara, because I could just keep going and going and going. What haven't I asked you? Is there anything that you want people to know about your book, about you, about this topic that we haven't covered?
Well, why history is so important. I think to know history is to understand, basically, in a nutshell. My little character has a motto: if you don't know your history, you don't know what you're talking about. How could you possibly understand what's going on today, or how we're going to build a framework for a better future if you don't understand how we got here? And you can explain that to children that when they're born, okay, as soon as they start talking, they have all of these questions, like they think about who am I and where did I come from and how do I fit in with this family? We can talk about their ancestors, their grandparents. We can encourage them to learn about that. And as they get older, they learn more about the community in which they live. We can go out and we can encourage them to learn about the community. Take them out into the community and ask questions. Oh, I wonder who used to live in that old house. I wonder what kind of school they went to. I wonder if they had the same kind of friends that I do. I wonder what they did for work. I wonder if work was the same then as it is now. Just giving them little ideas to connect with their community around them, and then of course with the wider world, connecting that to the wider world. How do we fit in with what's going on in Africa? Or how do we fit into what's going on with the war in Ukraine? Taking current situations and trying to help them to relate in that. And my books, that's what I'm trying to do. My books are intended to entertain children because I want them to have fun while they're learning, and that my character kind of helps them to envision themselves as a part of the journey. But I'm not just talking about events that happened in time. Some of my books are iconic events. Some of them are about places that are very familiar, like the Statue of Liberty or um, Ellis Island, but some of them involve national parks. Some of them involve nature, the sequoia trees, how they grew, uh, why they're important. Why is this beautiful Sequoia National Park one of the most polluted places on earth? What's going on
Hmm.
in the valley? Sometimes it's actually unhealthy to breathe the air in this beautiful national park. I talk about Native American rights in Mount Rushmore, how they built the Crazy Horse Memorial, how the land was taken from them. What's going on with Native American rights today? What do kids think about that? I talk about forgotten heroes in history, like Alonzo Swan on the Intrepid. At the time, there was a black segregated infantry unit. He helped save the ship during a kamikaze attack during World War II. He was given a bronze medal, one of the few survivors, but he thought that was wrong. He should have been acknowledged completely for their role. And he fought for 50 years until he was awarded the Navy Cross. So I talk about issues. I talk about people famous and not so famous. Slavery, for instance, is an issue that's brought up in my book about George Washington at Mount Vernon, how he knew that addressing the slavery issue at that point would tear the nation apart before it even got started. And it bothered him, but he felt that ultimately it was going to be the government's role to change it. Same thing with in Monticello. Jefferson actually wanted to outlaw the slave trade, but he couldn't do that because he faced the opposition of the other colonies. The southern colonies were not going to allow him to do that. He knew this dream of the republic was never going to get off the ground if that were in there. So there are all kinds of nuances that we normally don't think about. I want children to do critical thinking in the book. I want them to come up with their own questions, their own ideas, their own possible solutions to things. And so that's what my whole book series is about. And I want to empower kids to think. I want to encourage them to learn, to grow, and to become, one of the leaders of tomorrow as they develop.
It's really good. I could keep listening to this because it's just a history lesson in what you're saying. The entire thing is just making me want to keep asking questions. The other thing about what you said was it's about helping them understand, where they come from through the eyes of, say, other people who have been there. And it's not necessarily focused on them. It's focused on nurturing their curiosity, is what it sounds like to me as you're talking. Which and I'm like I'm probably passive aggressive when it comes to this, but with the phones, anytime I see my daughter on the phone, I'm like, what are you doing? A TikTok? Like immediately I have to go down the path. You're taking another picture of
Hmm.
yourself. And most of the time she's not, but I do have this part of me that's bothered by so many young people focused on let me show the world who I am and what
Exactly.
I'm
Yes.
wearing and what I'm eating. And it's like, it's so the wrong message to send to the world. You're just one tiny speck in the world. And you in that dress and you in that bikini and in the gym working out or eating this, drinking this drink, who cares? Like there's so much more to know and how you fit in with other people. It's like that's what matters. And I think that's kind of maybe that's not your message, but I do think it's working against what's important is this need for your own personal brand and to be noticed and I need you to include me. And
Yes.
it doesn't get us there any faster. And
Now
I
that social media has exacerbated that thing, now the children naturally, of course, when they get to that tween age,
yeah,
they it's all about me breaking away from parents and breaking away and creating their own image.
yeah,
But this has made it so easy for them
yeah,
to just put all the emphasis on that and to you know uh, it's a need to fit in with their peer group. And uh, it's also a way of them rebelling against their peer group, because it's like, well, look at me, I'm just as important as you are.
yeah,
Yet
yeah,
on the other hand, they really just want to fit in.
yeah.
So it's kind of a dichotomy.
It is, and I went off on that tirade, and while I use that as an example, the TikTok, I'm actually thinking about adults, adults that are doing this. So I think there's part of me that cringes at I don't want to see my children end up like these adults that I know that are putting themselves out there in this way. It's just it creates a disconnect between people. If I'm my own headline and I need you to know about me, then I'm showing you that you're second to me. And
Exactly.
it's frustrating. It's very, very frustrating. So I don't want to go off on a tangent on that. But Barbara, what's the best way for people to reach you? Where can they get your book? If they want more information on you, where should they go?
Well, the best place to go is my website, which is kind of one stop to everything. So my website is simply www.littlemisshistory.com. And from there, they can get to any of my resources. So I have my books on there. There are links to where you can buy them online on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, a lot of other major retailers and independent bookstores. But I also have other resources on there. I have an instant chat. So if they click on my website, the chat, if they want to instantly communicate, or they can email me through that as well. But I have a blog, and on the blog, I have book reviews. So I review books for all ages. I do articles for parents, for teachers, even for authors. And I have little resources, post freebies like the 14 reasons you should know history, or how to collect memories with your family, those kinds of articles. I have a YouTube channel, and I really developed that a lot during COVID. And on my YouTube channel, I have videos for kids by kids. I have 2-minute teacher lessons where I set up different scenarios. Parents or teachers can use these mini lessons to develop critical thinking or any other subject. So I have them on science, math, history, reading, comprehension, all kinds of things. I have a trivia challenge. I have all kinds of things on there, just fun, free resources. And my social media, of course, is on there as well. LinkedIn's, my Facebook page, and so on. So that's really the best place to, you know, get any of the resources that I have. I'm just trying to combine what I've learned over my 40-year career in education, and of course combining that with my passion for history to do as much as I can to help parents, kids, and teachers, as well as authors, for what I've learned of my mistakes along the way with that as well.
No, it's interesting stuff. I really enjoyed it. I'd love to do another one of these. We just talk about history because it's fascinating. I realize how much I've forgotten just listening to you talk. But thank you very much, Barbara. I hope you have a great holiday season. I appreciate your time today.
Oh, thank you so much. You as well.
Okay.
You've been listening to Cut Through the Noise with Dave Toronto. Please subscribe, and for more information, check us out on Instagram at CTTN Podcast.